The first time I felt it, a faint ripple in the calm surface of our marriage, was during a Thursday evening dinner. She was late, again. Rachel, my wife of 12 years, brushed it off with her usual charm, a story about last-minute paperwork at the office. But her eyes, they didn't quite meet mine when she spoke. First, I ignored it. Rachel had always been ambitious, and her career in corporate marketing demanded long hours. Yet, as the weeks passed, her lateness became routine. Her phone buzzed more often with messages she never shared, and the warmth in our shared moments began to cool. Suspicion crept in slowly, like a draft slipping through a barely open window. One night, after she'd gone to bed, I found myself in our living room, holding her phone. It was locked, odd, since we never had secrets between us before. I didn't push it, setting the phone down and telling myself it was just work stress making me paranoid. But paranoia doesn't vanish once it takes root. It festers. The following Saturday, Rachel went out claiming she had a client meeting at a downtown cafe. I nodded, offering her a distracted smile as I folded laundry. Minutes after her car disappeared down the street, I walked to the office window, my laptop glowing with an open browser tab. The location-sharing app I'd installed on her phone earlier that week. The dot that represented Rachel's phone didn't move toward the cafe. Instead, it veered in the opposite direction, stopping at an address I didn't recognize. That's when the world began to tilt. I sat in stunned silence, staring at the glowing map on my laptop. The address where Rachel's phone had stopped wasn't a cafe. It was a residential building on the other side of town. The kind with private parking and luxury apartments. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, I told myself. Perhaps it was a new client. But the pit in my stomach suggested otherwise. I spent the rest of that afternoon pacing the house, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. When Rachel came home, I acted normal. She kissed me lightly on the cheek, her perfume lingering in the air as she walked past me. "How was your meeting?" I asked casually. She paused briefly, pulling off her coat. "Good. Productive. The client has some ambitious plans, so it might mean more late nights." Her voice was breezy, her smile effortless, but I noticed the faintest sheen of sweat on her brow and a slight tremor in her hand as she placed her bag on the counter. That night, after she fell asleep, I retrieved her bag and began searching. I wasn't proud of myself, but I needed answers. Her purse was filled with the usual clutter: receipts, a makeup bag, and her work badge. But at the bottom, I found a folded slip of paper. A parking receipt from the luxury building she'd visited earlier. The timestamp on the slip confirmed it. She hadn't been at a cafe. I placed everything back as I'd found it, my hands trembling. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Could it be a business associate? An old friend? Or was it something worse? The next morning, I resolved to take the first concrete step toward the truth. I needed help, someone who could gather evidence without Rachel suspecting. A quick internet search led me to a private investigator named Mason Gray. His reviews were stellar, and his promises of discretion were exactly what I needed. When I called Mason later that day, I was met with a calm, confident voice. "You're doing the right thing," he assured me after I explained my situation. "It's better to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be." By the time I hung up, I felt like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, staring down into the unknown. I wasn't sure what I'd find, but I knew there was no turning back now. The waiting was unbearable. Mason assured me he'd be discreet, but every hour that passed felt like an eternity. I found myself jumping every time my phone buzzed, half hoping and half dreading the next update. 3 days later, the first email from Mason arrived. My heart pounded as I opened it, a mixture of dread and anticipation coursing through me. Inside were several photos. The first few showed Rachel walking into the luxury apartment building. She looked radiant, her hair styled perfectly, wearing a dress I hadn't seen before. She carried herself with a confidence I used to adore but now found unsettling. The timestamps showed her entering the building late in the afternoon. She didn't leave until almost midnight. The final photo made my stomach twist. Rachel wasn't alone. A man stood beside her in the building's lobby, his hand resting lightly on her lower back. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and wore the kind of smug smile that made my blood boil. They were laughing as they exited the building together, their body language speaking volumes. I closed the laptop and sat there in silence, staring at the wall. The evidence was damning, but my mind struggled to process it. The woman I'd built my life with, the mother of my children, was sneaking off to spend hours with another man. By the time Rachel came home that evening, I had plastered a fake smile on my face. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed more than just photographs to unravel the web of lies she was spinning. Over dinner, I studied her. She talked about her day at work, mentioning meetings and deadlines. She was a masterful liar, weaving her deceit seamlessly into our everyday life. I wondered how many times she'd looked me in the eye, smiling as she lied through her teeth. "Everything okay?" she asked, catching me staring. I forced a chuckle. "Yeah, just tired. Work's been a grind." She smiled sympathetically, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "You work too hard," she said softly. Her touch, once comforting, now felt like a mockery. That night, as Rachel slept soundly beside me, I began planning my next move. If she thought she could betray me and get away with it, she was gravely mistaken. The betrayal had settled in my chest like a weight I couldn't shake. I spent the next week playing the part of the oblivious husband, while working behind the scenes to uncover the full extent of Rachel's infidelity. Mason's updates became my lifeline. Each new report chipped away at the image of the woman I thought I knew. Rachel had been meeting her lover, whose name Mason identified as Damian Wright, for months. Damian was a high-powered financial consultant, the kind of man who exuded arrogance and charm in equal measure. Their rendezvous weren't limited to the luxury apartment. There were dinners at upscale restaurants, late-night drives to secluded spots, and even a weekend getaway at a lakeside resort. Mason's photos and timestamps painted a clear picture. This wasn't just a fling. It was a calculated, ongoing affair. I knew I couldn't confront her yet, not without airtight evidence and a plan. I wanted to strip away everything she'd taken for granted. Her comfort, her security, her ability to manipulate me. If she wanted to play games, I'd play too. But by my rules. I began documenting everything. I downloaded copies of Mason's reports and photos, creating a meticulous timeline of her deceit. I cross-referenced her credit card statements, noticing charges at places she'd never mentioned. Hotel bookings, expensive dinners, even jewelry. None of it for me. Next, I secured our finances. I met with a lawyer, a sharp woman named Angela Cho, whose no-nonsense demeanor made me feel like I had a formidable ally. Angela listened intently as I laid out the situation, her pen gliding across her legal pad with precision. "We can use this," she said, tapping the folder of evidence I'd brought. "If we play this right, you'll come out of this with the upper hand. But you'll need to be strategic. Patience is key. Patience." It became my mantra. I started moving funds into accounts Rachel couldn't touch, ensuring the children's college savings were secure and funneling money into an account under my sole name. I wasn't just preparing for a divorce. I was building a fortress she couldn't breach. The children were my greatest concern. Our two boys, Ethan and Liam, were the center of my world. I couldn't let Rachel's betrayal disrupt their lives. I started spending more time with them, taking them to the park, helping with homework, and tucking them in at night. Every moment with them strengthened my resolve. I would protect them no matter what. Rachel, oblivious to my efforts, continued her charade. She laughed at dinner, kissed me goodbye in the mornings, and acted like everything was fine. But I saw through the facade. Every word she spoke felt like another twist of the knife, fueling the fire that kept me moving forward. The trap was set. All I needed was the perfect moment to spring it. If there's one thing I learned from Rachel's betrayal, it's that timing is everything. I needed to catch her red-handed, leaving her no room for excuses or manipulation. But for that, I had to orchestrate the perfect opportunity, a scenario so controlled that every move she made would work against her. My chance came sooner than I expected. One evening, Rachel mentioned an upcoming business trip. It wasn't unusual for her to travel, but the way she casually dropped it into conversation made me instantly suspicious. "It's just a quick overnight stay," she said, sipping her wine. "The client insisted on meeting in person." I nodded, feigning indifference. "Where to this time?" "City Center," she replied, naming a boutique hotel downtown. "Nothing fancy." She was lying. I could tell by the slight pause before she spoke and the way she avoided my eyes. I'd seen enough of Mason's reports to know her patterns. City Center was where Damien often booked rooms for their secret meetings. This was it. My moment. The day before her trip, I contacted Mason and shared my plan. He agreed to set up surveillance at the hotel, planting cameras and ensuring we had clear, undeniable evidence of whatever unfolded. I also arranged for a photographer, someone with experience in discreet, high-stakes situations. That night, I played the doting husband. I helped Rachel pack her suitcase, asking innocent questions about her meetings and clients. She answered smoothly, her lies flowing so effortlessly that it made my stomach churn. When she kissed me goodbye the next morning, I almost laughed at the audacity of it all. "Love you," she said, smiling as she walked out the door. "Love you too," I replied, my voice steady. The next 24 hours felt like a slow burn. I stayed home, pretending to work while keeping in constant contact with Mason. Around noon, he confirmed her arrival at the hotel. An hour later, Damien joined her. They checked into a suite, and Mason discreetly captured photos of them entering together. By evening, my phone buzzed with another update. The photographer had captured everything. Intimate moments through the slightly open curtains of their suite, the two of them laughing, drinking, and entwined on the bed. The evidence was devastatingly clear. That night I barely slept. The images haunted me, but they also fueled my resolve. Tomorrow I would confront her, and I wouldn't do it in private. The morning of the confrontation, I woke with a strange calmness. It wasn't peace, exactly, but the clarity that comes when every piece of a plan falls into place. I was ready. Rachel came home around noon, her usual radiant self, dressed in the same tailored outfit she'd worn when she left. Her smile was practiced, almost too perfect, and her voice carried that easy charm she always used to mask her guilt. "Hey, Han," she said, setting her purse on the counter. "The meeting went well. Exhausting, though. How were the boys?" I smiled faintly, holding her gaze longer than usual. "They're great. We missed you." Her expression faltered for a split second, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "Missed you too," she said lightly. I decided not to waste time. "You're not planning anything this afternoon, are you?" She hesitated. "No, just catching up on some work." "Why?" "I thought we could take a drive. Something relaxing." My voice was casual, but the tension beneath it was impossible to ignore. Rachel's brows furrowed. "A drive? That's unexpected." "It'll be worth it," I said, grabbing the car keys and motioning for her to follow me. She gave a small, uncertain laugh but complied. As we drove, the weight in the car grew unbearable. Rachel kept glancing at me, her fingers fidgeting with the strap of her purse. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. "You'll see," I said, keeping my tone neutral. When we pulled up outside her parents' house, her face paled. "Why are we here?" I parked the car and turned to her, my voice steady but cold. "Because it's time, Rachel. Time for the truth." Before she could protest, I stepped out of the car and strode toward the front door. Her parents, Paul and Linda, greeted me warmly, their confusion evident as they saw Rachel trailing behind me. I didn't give them a chance to ask questions. "We need to talk," I said. "All of us." In the living room, I waited until everyone was seated before I spoke. "Paul, Linda, I've always respected you both. You've been wonderful grandparents to Ethan and Liam, and I've been proud to call you family. That's why I thought you should hear this from me." Rachel's voice cut in, frantic. "Kurt, what are you?" "Don't," I snapped, silencing her. My gaze shifted to her parents. "Rachel has been having an affair. For months. And I have proof." Linda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Paul leaned forward, his face a mask of disbelief. Rachel froze, her eyes wide with panic. "You're lying," she cried. "This is insane." I pulled out my phone, opened the folder Mason had sent me, and began showing the photos. One by one, I laid out the evidence. Her meetings with Damien, the hotel stays, the intimate moments captured in damning clarity. Rachel's face crumbled as each image landed like a blow. Her parents sat in stunned silence, their world unraveling in front of them. "How could you?" Linda whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We trusted you." It's not what it looks like," Rachel stammered, her voice breaking. "He's twisting everything." "Twisting?" I interrupted, my voice sharp. "Every lie you've told, every secret you've kept, is right here. You've betrayed me, our children, and everyone who ever believed in you." Rachel's bravado dissolved into tears, her words spilling out incoherently. But I didn't let her excuses distract me. I turned to her parents. "This is who she is," I said, my voice hard. "And now, everyone knows." As Rachel sobbed, her once pristine mask shattered, I felt a grim satisfaction. She had manipulated, deceived, and lied her way through our marriage. But today, the truth was hers to bear. Rachel's sobs echoed in the living room as her parents sat frozen, their faces etched with a mix of shock and shame. I stood, my arms crossed, the images of her betrayal still fresh in everyone's mind. "I trusted you," Paul said, his voice low and trembling. His words hit harder than I expected, not at Rachel but at me. He was disappointed in her, yes, but there was a sadness in his eyes that seemed directed at the entire situation. Rachel finally managed to choke out words between her sobs. I made a mistake. It was stupid. I don't know why it happened." I leaned forward, my voice sharp. "Don't you dare downplay this. It wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. Over and over, you chose him. Don't insult me by pretending it was a fleeting lapse." Linda, still clutching a tissue, turned to Rachel, her voice heavy with sorrow. "Is this true, Rachel? How could you do this to your family?" Rachel looked to her mother, then to her father, and finally to me. "I was unhappy," she whispered. "We were distant. I felt neglected." My laugh was bitter, filled with years of suppressed frustration. "Neglected? You're seriously trying to blame me for this? I worked every day to give you and the boys a good life. I sacrificed so much for this family. And you repaid me with lies." Rachel looked away, her tears flowing freely now. I wanted to feel pity, but there was none left in me. "I didn't want this to happen," she murmured. "I love you, Kurt. I love our family." "Love?" I snapped. "You don't betray the people you love. You don't risk everything we built for some thrill." Linda spoke up, her voice trembling. "What happens now?" I straightened, my resolve hardening. "What happens is Rachel faces the consequences of her choices. I've already consulted a lawyer. The divorce will be swift, and I'm seeking full custody of the boys. I won't let them live in a home shaped by betrayal." Rachel's head snapped up.
Kurt, no.
"Please, we can fix this. For the boys. For the boys." I interrupted, my voice cold. "You didn't think about them when you were sneaking off to meet Damien. You didn't think about them when you were lying to my face every day. Don't use them as your shield now." I turned to Paul and Linda, softening my tone. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but I won't let Rachel spin this into another lie. You needed to know the truth." Paul nodded, his expression grim. "You're doing the right thing, Kurt. This isn't easy, but you're protecting those boys, and that's what matters." Rachel's cries turned into pleas as I prepared to leave. "Kurt, please, don't do this. I'll make it right. I'll go to therapy. I raised a hand, cutting her off. "Save it, Rachel. You've made your choices. Now you'll live with them." With that, I turned and walked out, leaving her sobbing in her parents' living room. As I drove home, my mind raced with the enormity of what had just happened. I knew the hard part wasn't over, it was just beginning. But for the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I would rebuild. For myself, for Ethan and Liam. And no matter how difficult the road ahead, I knew one thing for sure. Rachel wouldn't get to destroy any more of the life I had fought to build. By the time I got home, the adrenaline had worn off, leaving me with a simmering exhaustion. But I couldn't afford to rest. Not yet. The next step required precision and focus. I opened my laptop and emailed Angela Cho, my attorney, detailing the confrontation and attaching the evidence Mason had collected. I included my intention to file for divorce and seek full custody of the boys. Angela responded within an hour. "You're in a strong position," her email read. "With the evidence we have, the courts will favor you in both custody and asset division. But we need to act quickly." That same afternoon, I met Angela in her office. She was as sharp and efficient as ever, walking me through the process with a calm, methodical approach. "We'll file the divorce papers tomorrow," she explained, flipping through the folder of evidence I'd compiled. "Given the level of deceit and the financial impact of her infidelity, we'll also pursue a claim for dissipation of marital assets." "Dissipation?" I asked, frowning. Angela nodded. "It's a legal term for when one spouse uses marital funds for their own benefit at the expense of the marriage, like spending money on an affair. Those hotel bookings, dinners, and gifts? We'll argue they were paid for with joint finances. The court can order her to repay those amounts as part of the settlement." The thought of Rachel having to account for every dollar she spent with Damien brought a grim sense of satisfaction. "What about custody?" I asked. "Given her behavior, we'll push for full custody," Angela said firmly. "The courts prioritize the children's well-being, and will make the case that they need stability, which you can provide. Her infidelity and dishonesty won't help her." By the time I left her office, the plan was in motion. Angela would serve Rachel with the divorce papers within days, and the court proceedings would begin soon after. All I had to do now was stay calm and focus on the boys. That evening, I sat down with Ethan and Liam. They were too young to understand the full scope of what was happening, but they deserved honesty. "Mom and I are going through a tough time," I began, keeping my voice steady. "We're going to live apart for a while, but that doesn't change how much we both love you." Ethan, my eldest, looked at me with wide, worried eyes. "Are you getting a divorce?" he asked bluntly. The question hit me like a punch to the gut, but I nodded. "Yes, but I promise, no matter what, I'll always be here for you. Both of you." Liam, still too young to grasp the gravity of the situation, simply nodded and climbed into my lap. Ethan, on the other hand, sat quietly processing. "Is it because of Mom?" he finally asked. I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes, grown-ups make mistakes that hurt each other. This is about fixing things so we can all be happier." Ethan didn't seem convinced, but he didn't press further. As I tucked them into bed that night, I promised myself I would shield them from as much of the fallout as possible. They didn't deserve to carry the weight of Rachel's choices. 2 days later, Rachel was served. I wasn't there to witness it, but Angela assured me it was handled professionally and without fanfare. Rachel's reaction, however, came swiftly. My phone rang that evening, her name flashing across the screen. I let it ring until it stopped, then listened to the voicemail she left. Her voice was a mix of fury and desperation. "Kurt, what the hell is this? Divorce papers? Full custody? You can't do this to me. We need to talk. Call me back." I didn't call her back. Instead, I forwarded the voicemail to Angela. "Let her vent," Angela advised. "But don't engage directly. From now on, all communication goes through me." Rachel didn't take kindly to being stonewalled. The next day, she showed up at the house unannounced. I saw her car pull into the driveway and felt my chest tighten. I hadn't prepared for a face-to-face confrontation so soon, but I refused to let her see me flinch. She banged on the door, her voice shrill. "Kurt, open up. We need to talk." I opened the door but didn't invite her in. Instead, I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "What do you want, Rachel?" I asked coldly. Her eyes were red-rimmed, either from crying or lack of sleep. "You can't just take everything away from me," she said, her voice trembling. "I made a mistake, okay? But this is extreme. Extreme." I shot back. You think protecting my children and myself is extreme? After what you've done? Her jaw tightened. You're being vindictive, Kurt. You're punishing me for something that... Stop! I interrupted, my voice firm. This isn't about punishment. This is about accountability. You lied, cheated, and put this family at risk. You don't get to play the victim now. Rachel's bravado faltered. What about the boys? They need their mother. They need stability, I said. And you've shown that you're willing to put your own desires above their well-being. I'm not keeping them from you, Rachel, but I'm making sure they're raised in an environment that prioritizes their needs. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't let my resolve waver. You should leave, I said, stepping back toward the door. This isn't the place for this conversation. If you want to discuss terms, go through Angela. Kurt, please, she began, but I cut her off. This isn't my fault, Rachel. You did this. Now you have to live with it. I closed the door as she stood there, stunned and tearful. My heart ached, but I reminded myself of the truth. This pain was temporary, and I was doing what was best for my family. The days following the confrontation with Rachel were filled with tension and quiet maneuvering. Angela wasted no time filing motions for temporary custody and financial disclosures. Meanwhile, Rachel's lawyer, a smooth-talking man named Victor Kane, made his presence known with a series of combative emails. Rachel's counterclaims were laughable. She painted herself as a misunderstood wife who had made a single mistake out of loneliness, claiming my pursuit of full custody was an overreaction. She even suggested that my busy work schedule made me an inattentive father. The audacity of it all ignited a fire in me that burned hotter with each passing day. Angela remained unfazed. They're trying to shift blame and muddy the waters, she explained. But the evidence is irrefutable. We'll stay the course. The first court hearing was a preliminary one to establish temporary custody. I arrived early, dressed in a tailored suit, every detail carefully considered. Angela had advised me to appear calm, composed, and confident. A stark contrast to Rachel, who arrived flustered and visibly distressed. Rachel glanced at me as we waited outside the courtroom, her eyes pleading. I didn't flinch. When Victor approached me with an insincere smile, offering to negotiate amicably, I simply said, "Talk to Angela." Inside the courtroom, the hearing was a whirlwind of formalities and legal jargon. Angela presented our evidence with precision. The photos, the financial records, and even Mason's reports. Rachel's lawyer attempted to discredit the surveillance, calling it invasive and unnecessary. But the judge wasn't buying it. "What matters here," the judge said, her tone sharp, "is the welfare of the children. Mr. Cole has demonstrated a stable and consistent presence in their lives. The evidence of Mrs. Cole's extramarital activities raises valid concerns about her judgment and priorities." When the judge ruled in my favor for temporary sole custody, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Rachel's face crumpled, her confidence eroding in real time. After the hearing, Rachel cornered me in the hallway. "Kurt," she whispered, her voice shaking, "please don't do this. Think about Ethan and Liam." "I am thinking about them," I replied. "That's why I'm fighting so hard." Her tears didn't move me. Not this time. I walked away, leaving her with her lawyer. That evening, back home with Ethan and Liam, I felt a bittersweet sense of victory. They were my focus now, my reason to keep going. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I was prepared for every twist and turn. Winning temporary custody felt like a small victory, but I knew the battle was far from over. Rachel wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. True to form, she launched a campaign to turn the tide in her favor. Over the next few weeks, Rachel tried every tactic to regain control. She began showing up unannounced at the boys' school, volunteering for events and making sure the teachers and other parents noticed her efforts. On one occasion, she brought cupcakes to Ethan's class, something she'd never done before. It was painfully transparent, a staged display of maternal devotion meant to bolster her image. Angela had anticipated this. "She's building a case for joint custody," she warned. "But actions speak louder than appearances. Stick to your routine. Be consistent. That routine was exhausting but rewarding. I made sure Ethan and Liam's lives were as normal as possible. I helped with homework, coached their soccer team, and tucked them into bed every night. I wasn't just fighting for custody. I was proving to myself and my sons that we could thrive without Rachel's deceit shadowing our lives. Meanwhile, Angela and I focused on strengthening our case. The financial disclosures revealed a damning pattern. Rachel had funneled thousands of dollars into her affair, spending money on luxury hotels, extravagant dinners, and even gifts for Damien. Angela included this evidence in a new motion to recover those funds, framing them as marital assets wasted on infidelity. Rachel's lawyer, Victor, countered with a request for mediation, claiming his client wanted to resolve matters amicably. It was a thinly veiled attempt to regain leverage. Angela advised me to agree but warned me to stay vigilant. The mediation session was tense. Rachel sat across the table from me, looking like a shadow of the confident woman I once knew. Her lawyer did most of the talking, painting her as a remorseful wife and devoted mother who had made a single mistake. I couldn't stay silent. "This wasn't a mistake," I said, my voice steady but firm. "It was a pattern of deception that spanned months, maybe longer. She risked our family for her own gratification." Rachel's eyes welled up with tears.
Kurt, I'm sorry. Eve apologized.
"Can't we find a way to move forward? For the boys?" Her attempt to play the victim only solidified my resolve. "Moving forward means doing what's best for them," I replied. "And that starts with honesty." By the end of the session, no agreement had been reached. Victor's offers were weak: supervised visitation and a token gesture of financial restitution. Angela shut them down swiftly, countering with terms that left Rachel visibly shaken. "She's not ready to face reality," Angela said as we left. "But the judge will make her." That night, I reviewed the evidence we'd compiled. The photos, the financial records, the timeline of her affair, it was all airtight. But more than that, I had the unwavering support of Ethan and Liam. They were my strength, my reason to endure. As I tucked them into bed, Ethan looked up at me and asked, "Dad, are we going to be okay?" I smiled, brushing his hair back. "We're going to be more than okay. I promise." The final court date arrived on a brisk Monday morning. I dressed carefully, choosing a dark suit and a tie that Ethan had picked out for me. "This one's lucky," he'd said with a grin, and I clung to that small comfort as I prepared for what lay ahead. Angela met me outside the courthouse, her confidence as steadying as ever. "We've got this," she said, handing me a folder with the finalized evidence. "Stay calm, answer clearly, and let the facts speak for themselves." Inside the courtroom, Rachel sat with Victor at her side. She looked pale, her hands clutching a tissue as if it were a lifeline. When she glanced at me, there was a flicker of something. Regret, maybe, or fear. But it didn't matter anymore. The proceedings began with Angela presenting our case. She spoke with precision, laying out every detail of Rachel's infidelity, her misuse of marital funds, and the impact on our children. The photos Mason had taken, the financial records Angela had unearthed, and the timeline of her affair painted an unassailable picture. When Rachel's lawyer countered, he tried to frame her as a loving mother who had made a mistake out of loneliness. He argued that her actions, while regrettable, didn't diminish her ability to parent. "She deserves a chance to rebuild her relationship with her children," Victor said, his voice heavy with practiced sincerity. Then Rachel took the stand. She wept as she described her regret, apologizing for her actions and pleading for joint custody. "I love my boys more than anything," she said through tears. "I made a mistake, but I'm their mother. They need me." It was Angela's turn to cross-examine. She was ruthless but fair, methodically dismantling Rachel's claims. She presented the evidence of her months-long affair, the financial records showing money spent on Damien, and the lies Rachel had told to cover her tracks. "Mrs. Cole," Angela said, her voice calm but cutting, "can you honestly say your actions reflected the best interests of your children?" Rachel hesitated, her lips trembling. I wasn't thinking clearly. That much is evident," Angela replied. No further questions, Your Honor. When it was my turn to testify, I spoke from the heart. I described the love and effort I poured into raising Ethan and Liam, my commitment to their happiness, and the devastation I felt when I discovered Rachel's betrayal. But I didn't dwell on the pain. I focused on the future, the stable, loving home I was determined to provide. I'm not here out of anger, I said, my voice steady. I'm here because my boys deserve a life free from lies and uncertainty. They deserve stability, and I'm ready to give that to them. When the judge finally rendered her decision, the courtroom fell silent. She granted me full custody of Ethan and Liam, with limited visitation rights for Rachel. She also ordered Rachel to repay the funds she had spent during her affair and relinquish her claim to the marital home. Rachel sobbed as the verdict was read, her composure crumbling. I felt a pang of something, sadness, perhaps, for what could have been, but it was overshadowed by relief. Justice had been served. That evening, as I sat with Ethan and Liam on the couch, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. You're stuck with me now, I joked, pulling them into a hug. Ethan grinned. We wouldn't have it any other way. Neither would I. The weeks following the court ruling were a whirlwind. Life at home became a sanctuary, a safe haven for Ethan, Liam, and me. But for Rachel, the world was unraveling, and the consequences of her choices were finally catching up to her. The first blow came when she had to move out of the house. The court had granted me ownership of the property, leaving her scrambling to find a new place. She ended up in a modest apartment across town, a far cry from the life of comfort and stability she'd once enjoyed. She tried to make the best of it, decorating the space and setting up a bedroom for the boys. But they weren't eager to visit. Ethan, in particular, had grown distant from her, his disappointment evident in every clipped response to her texts and calls. Liam, still too young to fully understand, followed his brother's lead, his enthusiasm for their visits waning over time. Rachel's finances took a severe hit as well. Between the court-ordered restitution and her own legal fees, she found herself struggling to make ends meet. Damien was nowhere to be seen. He had disappeared shortly after the affair was exposed, leaving her to face the fallout alone. I heard through mutual friends that she tried to reconnect with some of our old social circle, seeking support. But betrayal has a way of isolating people. Many of them sided with me, unwilling to condone her actions. Despite everything, Rachel continued to reach out, attempting to repair her relationship with the boys. She sent gifts, wrote long letters apologizing for her mistakes, and begged me to reconsider the visitation schedule. I remained civil but firm. You need to focus on proving to them and to yourself that you're capable of change, I told her during one of our rare phone calls. That takes time. Her voice cracked as she replied, I just want to be their mom again. But being a mother wasn't about what she wanted anymore. It was about what the boys needed. One Saturday, Ethan and I were working on a school project in the kitchen when Liam came running in, clutching a letter Rachel had sent. Mom says she misses us, he said, holding it out for me to read. I skimmed the letter, noting the earnest tone and promises of change. I handed it back to Liam. She does miss you, I said honestly. But missing you doesn't undo the mistakes she made. Ethan looked up from his project, his face serious. Is she ever going to stop making excuses? The question hit me harder than I expected. I don't know, bud, I said, meeting his gaze. That's up to her. While Rachel's life seemed to spiral, ours was finding its rhythm again. Ethan excelled in his soccer league, Liam's schoolwork improved, and our evenings were filled with laughter and quiet moments of connection. I started to see a future free from the shadows of betrayal, a future where the boys and I could thrive. Rachel, meanwhile, was learning the hard way that actions have consequences. Her once perfect life had crumbled, leaving her with nothing but the memories of what she'd lost. Months passed, and the storm began to settle. The boys and I established a new routine, one that felt stronger and more stable with each passing day. Our home was no longer a battlefield of lies and suspicion. It was a sanctuary, filled with trust and love. Rachel, on the other hand, was still grappling with the wreckage of her choices. She had made several attempts to rebuild her relationship with Ethan and Liam, but her efforts often fell flat. The boys were polite during their visits but distant, their trust in her shattered and slow to heal. One afternoon, Rachel called me unexpectedly. Her voice was hesitant, stripped of its usual confidence. "Kurt," she said, "can we meet? I need to talk to you." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to refuse, to keep her at arm's length. But curiosity won out. "Fine," I said. "Tomorrow, at the coffee shop on Main." The next day, I arrived early, settling into a corner booth where I could see the door. Rachel walked in a few minutes later, looking pale and thinner than I remembered. She carried herself with a fragility that was almost unrecognizable. "Thanks for meeting me," she said as she sat down, her hands clasped tightly around a cup of tea. "I know I'm the last person you want to see." "What do you want, Rachel?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She took a deep breath. "I wanted to apologize, not just for the affair, but for everything. For the lies, for the way I treated you, for putting my own selfishness above our family." Her words were careful, deliberate. I could tell she'd rehearsed them, but there was an undercurrent of genuine regret. "I know I can't undo what I've done," she continued, "and I know I've lost your trust. But I need you to know that I'm trying. I'm in therapy. I'm working on myself. And I want to be a better mother to Ethan and Liam." Her voice cracked on their names, and for the first time in months, I saw a glimmer of the woman I had once loved. The woman I thought she was. I took a long sip of my coffee before responding. "Rachel, I don't hate you. I don't even think I can anymore. But forgiveness doesn't mean things go back to the way they were." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I understand. I need to know if there's a chance to be a part of their lives again. Not for me, but for them." Her desperation was palpable, but I couldn't make her any promises. "That's not up to me," I said. "It's up to Ethan and Liam. If you want their trust, you'll have to earn it." Her tears spilled over as she nodded. "I will. I swear I will." That evening, I sat down with the boys and told them about my meeting with Rachel. Ethan frowned, his brows knitting together. "Is she really going to change? Or is this just another excuse?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But she says she's trying. And if she is, maybe we should give her a chance to prove it." Liam was quiet, his small fingers twisting the hem of his shirt. "I miss her sometimes," he said softly. "But I don't want her to hurt us again." "You have every right to feel that way," I told him. "And no one, not me, not her, will ever force you to do anything you're not ready for." Ethan nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding crossing his face. "Okay," he said. "We'll see." For the first time, there was a faint glimmer of hope. Not for reconciliation or redemption, but for the possibility of moving forward. We were all navigating uncharted territory, but we were doing it together. A year had passed since the court ruling, and life had settled into something resembling normalcy. Ethan and Liam were thriving. Ethan had just been awarded MVP for his soccer team, and Liam's teachers couldn't stop praising his creativity and curiosity. Watching them grow filled me with pride, and I finally felt like we had built a solid foundation free of Rachel's betrayal. Rachel had kept her word about therapy. She remained consistent in her sessions, working to rebuild herself piece by piece. Her visits with the boys, though limited, were gradually becoming more meaningful. She had stopped trying to buy their affection and started listening to them instead. Ethan, ever cautious, was slow to open up, but Liam's natural warmth allowed for tentative moments of connection. One crisp autumn afternoon, Rachel invited the boys to her apartment for dinner. I was wary at first but decided to let them go, trusting their instincts. When they returned that evening, Ethan seemed quieter than usual, while Liam bubbled with excitement about the meal they'd shared. "She made spaghetti, Dad," Liam said, his eyes wide with enthusiasm. "And it was actually good this time." Ethan rolled his eyes but smiled faintly. "She didn't burn the garlic bread this time," he added, a hint of humor in his voice. I chuckled. "Sounds like progress." Ethan hesitated, his expression turning thoughtful. She said she was sorry for everything. She didn't make excuses this time. She just said she was sorry. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I nodded, letting him process at his own pace. What do you think about that? I asked gently. He shrugged, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Acceptance, maybe, or the beginning of it. I think she means it. Months turned into seasons, and slowly, cautiously, Rachel began to rebuild her relationship with the boys. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was progress. For my part, I focused on moving forward. I threw myself into work and hobbies, rediscovering parts of myself I had neglected during the chaos of our marriage. One evening, as I was tucking Liam into bed, he looked up at me with those wide, curious eyes of his. "Do you think Mom will ever be part of the family again?" he asked. I sat on the edge of his bed, considering my answer. I think family isn't just about living in the same house or spending every day together, I said. It's about caring for each other and trying to be better. If she keeps trying, maybe she'll find her place again. But for now, it's okay to take things slow. Liam nodded, satisfied with my response. I think she's trying really hard. So do I said, brushing his hair back. And that's what matters. The scars of betrayal never fully fade, but they don't have to define the rest of the story. I learned that forgiveness isn't about letting someone back into your life. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of anger and pain. Rachel and I would never be what we once were, but we could build something new. A respectful distance, a shared commitment to our boys, and a mutual understanding that some lessons are learned the hard way. Ethan, Liam, and I continued to thrive, finding joy in the little moments that made our lives rich and full. And as I watched them grow into strong, resilient young men, I knew that we had emerged from the storm stronger than before. Rachel had lost everything she thought mattered, but in doing so, she gained something far more valuable. The chance to be honest, to rebuild, and to truly earn her place in their lives. And for me, I had found peace. Not because the pain had vanished, but because I had chosen to rise above it. For myself, for my boys, and for the life we were creating together.